Welcome, everyone, to Paranormal Roundtable. I'm your host, Josh Turner. This is PRT. Join us in the real reality. This is PRT Saturday, and this is the Halloween. It's Halloween time. It's spooky season. And I got to say, I've been really enjoying these episodes. It's just one story. You know, some of these people, like the person we're going to talk about tonight, she has multiple stories, but this is one that was very, this one shook her up really bad. And she has this person has a slew of things that took place after this, and we will be talking about those on the live stream, and maybe even on one of the Patreon episodes, because she thinks that, well, when I talked to her, I think we put some things together. We kind of figured some stuff out. And her name is Leila. And this happened to her in Houston, well, an affluent suburb of Houston. And I don't know if I should say where it happened, but I mean, I don't know. But anyways, I mean, I don't think it really matters.
There's a lot of suburbs in Houston.
Yeah, we'll just leave it
Houston's
at that.
a huge city.
Yeah, we'll just leave it at that. I mean, I was going to say maybe the absolute place where it happened. I don't think we should do that. I mean, I don't think it's that important. But anyway, so she had a child, and the child was 9 months, and she was back at work, and she was working at a department store at the mall, a very nice big mall there. That I've been to that mall. And she said that it was just a grind. It was like day to day. She was having, whatever. And then this happened. And then after that, it kind of opened up like this Pandora's box of all this weird paranormal stuff. And like I said, we'll get into some of that stuff at a future time. But before I go any further, the Patreon. If you're not on the Patreon, join the Patreon. It's $10, $20, $30, $40, $50 tier. We've talked about this before. And if you're listening to this and you haven't heard this before, go join. You will not regret it. And you will get an extra show every Tuesday. And it comes down 7 o'clock on Tuesday.
Yep, 7 o'clock.
Yep. And then we have the members only, which is $5, and for an entire month, $5. And it helps the show immensely. And that is Thursday. You will get that on Thursday. Now, the Patreon is a different animal. The Patreon, you get a box of merchandise. We call it a swag bag. It's a swag box, basically, full of nice stuff. Depending on what tier you're on, the minimum is $10. And you get an extra show every Tuesday, and then you get the swag. And so it's really a good deal, and it's worth it. The top tier, which is $50, gets you a shirt, a hoodie, a hat, and 2 books, and then my 2 autographed books. So it's like a really good deal. And yeah, it's definitely worth it. And you get that after 2 months, and then after that, it's every 6 months you get another swag bag every 6 months. In perpetuity, as long as supplies last, and the supplies will last as long as we keep getting subscribers and are able to get the money to buy the supplies, and we just keep going. And then it helps the show, and it promotes the show. When you wear the merchandise, that's very important to us because you advertise for us, and we want you to have these nice hoodies and shirts and hats and whatever. And if you join the $30, $40, $50 tier, you get the tumbler.
Yep.
So that we can't guarantee you the $10 and $20 tier, but the $30, $40, $50 tier, we guarantee you'll get your tumbler as long as supplies last. I think we have about 25 to 30 of them left, I believe. So, yeah. So let's get started here. Like I said, her name is Leila. This happened to her when she was 25 years old. And now get this. When this happened to her, this was 2000. Right? Yeah, 2001, I believe. So that was 24 years ago. She's almost my age. She's a year younger than me. And prior to this, she says, I remember having 2 experiences, paranormal. One of them was definite. Now, it was very profound. I'm not going to get into it real long, whatever. But it was a shadow. Well, both of them were, but one of them, I think, was a hat man experience she had. And that happened to her when she was 13. And well, in fact, both of them happened when she was 13, but that happened when she was 13. And then after that, there was nothing that she could remember of any real importance. And then she had this. And now she was working at a mall, and she's like, life was just a grind. I just had my child. I took some time off, and then I went back to work, and I was managing in a department store, and I was the head of one of the departments of this department store. And she said that, her life was pretty uneventful. She married a guy who worked really hard, had a pretty good job, and he was a few years older than her, and he had gone to college, gotten a degree, and was using it. And she said it was like Yuppieville. She's like, we were just like yuppies, and everything was fine. She's like, but one day, she goes, I was out with my baby stroller walking my son. And she says, I noticed these two children across the street, and they were just kind of staring at me. And she's like, and they didn't look like, weird children. They didn't look like anything. They weren't Wednesday Addams, like looking at her from across the street, like, come and play with us, Tiny. It was nothing like that. They weren't from the Stanley Hotel. There was,
Red Rum.
Yeah, it wasn't like Red Rum.
Yeah, I want to play with you.
Yeah, no, it wasn't. Yeah, it wasn't Pet
They
Cemetery.
were like Gage.
Yeah. But she said that she was walking. She goes, and she's actually kind of a funny person. And we went really deep into a lot of different stuff that happened to her. But this one in particular was the beginning of a lot of weird stuff. And I've noticed that with this, because like I was talking before the show with you, Maddie, and I was telling you, and Maddie and Anthony and Tony are the co-hosts here. And I told you I know 3 people in my personal life who've had black-eyed kid experiences. Loki was one of them. He's a really good friend of mine. Another one was a guy I used to work security with, and I worked with him at this plant. And he was a black guy, and he had a black-eyed kids story from when he was in Dallas, like right downtown Dallas. He's like, I was working security, and I'll tell his story one day, but not today. And so, yeah, I'll tell his story, but yeah. And I recently reached out to his brother, and that particular individual is deceased now, but his brother retold that story to me. He says, dude, he told that story like over and over again. Like every Christmas, he would tell that story. He goes, that we would get together, and my children heard that story about 20 times. It never got old. So I reached out to him through social media, and, so one day I'm going to tell his story. But what happened here to Leila, she was walking her children, and she's like, it was, just around the block, walking her child, and she sees these 2 children, and it is dark. She's like, it had gotten dark. And she's like, and it was winter, but you know how winter in Texas is. Sometimes it's cold, sometimes it's not. And down in Houston, and oftentimes it's just kind of temperate, And she said it was about 65 degrees, and it wasn't that cold. She's like, but I had my child bundled up, and he was, and he was just enjoying the stroll. And she's like, he began to cry uncontrollably and freaking out. And she's like, and I just thought, as soon as I walked up by these 2 kids who were standing there looking at me from across the street, my child begins to scream and cry. And she was just like, why is his name is Bradley. She's like, Bradley's just crying. And she's like, I need to get him inside. Maybe he's cold. Maybe something's going on here. There was a little breeze going. And so she says, I had to cross the street at the end of the block. And she goes, and I'm not going to lie, for no reason. She's like, I was quite intimidated. And she goes, and I looked around, there was nobody around. And she's like, and even though it was dark, because it was only 6:30, she's like, about that time, there were always people walking around, especially when it's a nice day, nice night, very pretty, January day. And I'll be honest, there are some bitterly cold days here in Central Texas in January. And then all of a sudden you'll get 2 days in a row of just nice, beautiful, sunny, let's go in a kayak, let's go down to the river in the kayak, and then it just, and then all of a sudden, boom, you're in an Arctic vortex or whatever they call it. And you're struggling for survival and building an igloo. That's just Texas, but she said this was one of those days where, why was there no one around? She thought it was odd. And that often happens with this weird phenomena, known as the black-eyed kids. And of course, one of my dear friends and colleague, David Weatherly, was one of the first authors he was the first author to break this story. And it was from somebody who had, I think it was in Abilene, Texas, and who had one of these encounters. Now we have multiple stories about these black-eyed kids. And in fact, when I went into the files, I found like a dozen stories involving these, and then maybe a dozen more that could be linked to this phenomena, Kind of like what you were talking about, Maddie, where you said you saw your friend's eyes change.
Yeah, it was, so basically it was a classmate, I was walking by him, and I looked up and his eyes were completely black, and he had like this ear-to-ear smile on his face. So I was like, whoa. That's
and now,
normal.
see, that's what I'm talking about. It can be linked to that, but what you saw is a phenomena we call the grinning man. So that's what I think that is, and I've heard of this. Now, most recently, I had a guy from Norway who told me that he saw his best friends. They were playing video games back in the 90s. He goes, and I look over, and his eyes are completely black. And he goes, it scared the crap out of me. He goes, I went and I took the sleeping bag, I crawled into it. He's like, I grabbed a hatchet that he had laying there in the closet, and I just slept with it. And but nothing, he goes, we stayed friends for years, and there was nothing like that ever again. But the same thing. He was sitting there with a big goofy smile on his face, and that's one of the stories I think is linked to this phenomenon. But it's definitely related, but I don't know if it's the same thing. What happened to Leila? She crossed the street, and she said when I did, she's like, I looked down to my left after I crossed the street. I lived the next street over, and I had to go down to the end of that block, take another left, and then all the way down to the end of the street. And she goes, and I was shaking. She's like, I was shaking, and I don't know why. She's like, and she called me Josh, and she was like, Josh, you don't understand. Like, it was like this uncontrollable fear. She goes, and my instinct was to just grab my child out of the stroller and just run with him, take off running. She's like, but I wanted to keep my composure. And she goes, and I looked down to my left when I crossed the street, I didn't see them. They weren't there. They were gone. And she's like, and I'm like, oh God, I'm more scared now because I didn't see these little people, and she called them little people. And I said, now let me ask you this. And I told her, I was like, do you say that they're little people. I mean, she goes, because I don't believe they were children. She's like, they might have looked like children. But here's what happened. She gets down to the end of that block, goes to take that left to go down to the end of her street, to get home. She's like, and my husband, he always came home around 7:00. He was at that time an absolute workaholic. Since then, he's gotten, to work a lot less, be with her more, and be more understanding. And she's like, and I expected him home, and she goes, and I had already made dinner and everything. And she's like, and I got off at 3 p.m, 3 days a week. And so I just cut my hours and I gave up my position and just went to be a regular worker. And she said, I just had to be involved in raising my child. She's now got 2 children. And Leila's walking down the street and she says, right there on the second house, she goes, and I don't think that it really had anything to do with the people that live there. She goes, I know who lives there, and it wasn't these people, these little people. And she said that they were sitting in the driveway and they stood up. She's like, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, here are these kids. She's like, so I crossed the street to get away from them, even though my house was on that side of the street. And I just thought, I'm going to walk down. Our house is second to the end on that block, and I'm just going to cross back over. And she said that they walked out in front of her. And one of them stood on the sidewalk where she couldn't keep going. And the other one stood out in the street right off the curb where they had literally were like kind of blocking her in. And she was like, excuse me. And the little girl, it was a little girl and a little boy. And she's like, and they were dressed in just regular clothes, but they looked like they went to a private school. She goes, it wasn't like from the olden times or anything like that. That was her words. Because I told her, I said, hey, we're from the olden times. And so she said the little girl was wearing a white blouse with black, skirt went down to the ankles, like a, and the little boy was wearing a white shirt and black shorts. Now she thought that was weird because it was wintertime and it had started to get a little bit chilly. And she said that she was like looking at the little boy and he was staring kind of off into space. And she said, the first thing I noticed, I looked over to my right, I see the little boy and he's got completely black eyes. And then she turned and looked at the little girl and the little girl's got completely black eyes. And she's like, excuse me? And they just kept staring at her. So she goes to walk around the little boy. She's like, but then the little boy got out and walked out in front of the stroller and started to kind of reach for Bradley. She goes, and I said, excuse me. So she goes, I pick up my child at that point, pull him out of the stroller, and I'm holding him, and he's crying really bad. And the little girl says, your child is hungry. And she's like, okay, yeah, well, I'm going to go home and feed him. And then she's like, I'm just walking across the street. And she's like, and they follow me. And they walked really fast and they got right out in front of me again. And they're on the other side of the street. And she's like, I don't like this. This is whatever game you're playing. I want to be left alone. And the little boy says, this is no game. And he says, we're hungry. And he tells her that. And I've heard this before multiple times. When she said that, I told her, I said, let me guess. They said they were hungry. And she said, yeah. She said, yeah. And while we were talking, we had to stop because she began to cry. And she said that the fear, she's like, there was a fear. She goes, my hair was standing up. It was like static electricity. And she goes, and there was nobody around, nobody. And she's like, and I'm sitting there or standing there and I'm holding Bradley and I'm like, there's no one around. Why is that? She's like, every house looked like it was just all the lights were off. Really weird. And she said it was so weird. She asked me something. She's like, have you ever seen that movie Vivarium? You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
And I told her, I said, yeah, it was a disturbing film. I ended up watching it with my wife at Anthony's suggestion, which was I never should take that. And Anthony goes, it's a really weird movie, and you should check it out. Of course, Nellie's like, I want to watch it. I'm like, oh, no. So I watched it, and I'm just disturbed by it. She goes, it was like that. She goes, it was like I was in another alternate universe where everyone was just inside, asleep or something at like 6:30 at night. And she's like, I wanted to scream. She's like, the fear was like, there was like, you could taste it. She said, in fact, there was like a metallic taste in my mouth while I was talking to them. And she's like, Josh, have you ever heard of anything like this? And I said, yes, absolutely. There was another woman, and I told her that she was also from a suburb, it wasn't a Black-Eyed Kid story, but she saw something weird. And that happened in Katy, Texas. Now, what's weird about that is Katy was also the site of where there were two guards that had werewolf, dogman, whatever encounters. And that woman, I told her, I said, that woman in Katy, and we'll call her Kay encountered something that looked like a black-eyed adult in her driveway, right? So there was something weird there, And so, I reached out to Kay and I told her, I said, hey, if there's a person that had an experience with these children who lives in the Houston area and she would like to correspond because she asked me if I could get her number. I said, I'll ask. And so I introduced Kay to Leila, and now they have talked, and they're not like best friends or whatever, but they have chatted and talked about their experiences, and both of them described the same thing. This fear that took them over and their hearts beating out of their chest. They felt like they were just like their pulse was extremely high. Sweating palms, everything you could imagine. The metallic taste in their mouths, which was weird. Both of them had that. So I told her, I said, that's a very interesting thing that both of you had this same symptoms. The thing that got me about these children was that they were so passive aggressive isn't the word, because they were kind of being aggressive, but they weren't being physical. And they didn't tell her, we're going to physically do harm to you, but they acted like, they were going to. And she said that I felt threatened. And she says, you're scaring me. And then one of them just looked at her, the little boy, and he says, ma'am, we're just hungry. Can you feed us, please? And she says, I have no food for you. And this is where the threat comes in. The little girl says, oh, you have something that can feed us. When that little girl said that, she looked at her and she goes, you get the hell away from me. She's like, get out of my way.
Yeah, you don't say that to Mama Bear.
And this woman is holding a 9-month-old child, and she says, you have something that can feed us. She's like, immediately I thought, they're talking about my kid. And she told them, she's like, these kids, I asked her, I said, how old did they look? She said, maybe 8, 8 years old at the most. She goes, and she's like, I had never thought in my mind about punting a child, but she said it. She was like, these things are not children. I don't know what they are. And she told him, she says, you need to get out of my way. And she says, if I wasn't holding my son and my son's life was at stake, we would have been fighting. She said something interesting too. She says her instinct was to literally just go inside the house and come out with something and get rid of them. Because she said they weren't human. And she said, and I told her, she asked me, she says, what do you think would have happened if I would have fought with them physically? I said, you would have become very ill. I said, you would have become very ill. She goes, why do you think that? I said, because I've had so many people tell me that this is what has happened to them when they have even an interaction with these beings. And if you touch them in any way, there's something that seems almost like akin to radiation sickness. Now, I've delved into this before, and I've talked to people at length about this. And I've gone over this with David Weatherly and a couple of other researchers. And we've gone around and round. I mean, just coming up with theories, ideas, whatever.
Well, I was going to say that the metallic taste in the mouth, that's actually a side effect of radiation exposure.
Yeah, I was going to say that. But here's the thing. I told her, I said, you would have probably become very ill. And in fact, I said, you may have been exposed to it in that way. And unfortunately, your son too. But she says, she goes, I didn't know what else to do. She's like, I wasn't devout. She goes, but the name Jesus came into my mind. And it just said, rebuke them. She's like, it was like my inner monologue. She goes, and my inner monologue, for whatever reason, she's like, my aunt, who's now deceased. She's like, that was my mother's youngest sister. She's like, everybody talks about having not everybody, but a lot of people talk about having an inner monologue. She goes, and my Aunt Grace was my inner monologue. And she said, I just heard her name, her words in my head. And she goes, but it was different. It was like she was really there and she was telling me to do this. And she said that the little girl got in front of me and got really close to me, and I'm holding my son. She's like, and I turned my body to kind of keep from whatever these people were going to do to me. And she says, she's like, Jesus. And she looks at them. There's no reaction. And she says, in the name of Jesus, the Son of God. She's like, get away from me. Go away. And one of them, the little boy, tells her, we're just hungry. And the little girl says, why are you being like this? Why are you trying to hurt us? And this woman, Leila, tells him, she's like, what do you mean? I'm not trying to hurt you. I don't know how this is hurting you. Just let me go. And the little girl says, we're famished. We need food. And then she says, well, go tell your parents to give you food. She's like, where are your parents? And the little girl tells her, she's like, I don't know. And the little boy says, we don't have parents. I don't know. Both of them saying the same thing. And she says, well, that's sad. She said, that's very sad. I'll pray for you, but I have to go. And she started to walk the opposite way. She's like, just then, she says, my neighbor that lived at the end of the street, he's going out to his car. She's like, I don't know this guy. She's like, he's like just some random guy, and she's like, I started running toward him and I'm like, sir, can you help me? And he turns around, he looks at her, and he's just kind of squinting his eyes through his glasses. She said, I could see him just kind of straining, looking, but he was looking past me. So I knew he was seeing them. And she runs up and she says, these two people here, they won't let me go. And they had walked toward her and they were standing in the middle of the street. And this man looks at them and he says, okay, yeah, come into the garage. She's like, I don't even know this guy. He's some stranger. She's like, for all I know, this is a trap. I don't know. She's like, but I felt like I was okay. I was going to be okay. She goes, just then I see this teenage girl come out into the garage and she's like, Dad? And he's like, yeah, go inside, honey, go inside. And he goes and he closes the garage door and these what look like children are walking up his driveway. And at that time she goes, The man looked at her, and she goes, and I looked down at his arm, and you could see the hair on his arm standing up. And he looks at her, and he says, go inside, go inside, go inside. And he goes and he grabs a bat. And she said at that point, she goes, they just kept walking up the driveway, and then there goes the door, and it closes. They go inside this guy's house. She's introduced to his son, his teenage daughter, and the mother, and they're cooking dinner. And she goes, I'm in tears, and Bradley's crying. And this man is like, are you okay? And then they hear ding dong, and the doorbell rings. And the mother, she's looking confused, this man's wife. And she's like, honey, what's going on? He goes, I'm not real sure. He's holding a bat, a softball bat. And he's like, don't answer that. And his son is walking toward the door, and he's like, Dad, what's up? And he's just like, look. She said the daughter looked like she might have been 14, 15. Son was 16, 17 maybe. She don't know these people. And she's like, and I'm standing there, I'm in tears, and I'm like, please, call the police, call the police. And he goes, okay. So he tells his wife, call the police. And then the wife, she goes to call the police, and then she screams because at her back door is one of these children. The little boy is standing there looking in the window, and he's literally lightly scratching on the glass of the back door. And she's like, their dog was in the backyard, and he was growling and barking and going crazy. And she turns and tells her husband, she's like, Scooter's going crazy. That's the dog. And he's just like, I don't know what these things are. I don't know what this is. He goes, but that's not a child. The man said that. And then the doorbell rings again. Ding, 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 ding. It's the little girl. She just keeps doing it. And the little boy looks out and says, it's a little girl. And he's like, Dad, what do we do? And he's like, I don't know. Let's call the police. And then the boy, she's like, I remember, I'll never forget. She goes, I was standing behind him kind of in the entryway, holding Bradley. And I told him, get away from the door. I think something's going to happen. And he looks out the door, and he goes, ugh, and he backs up, and he turns, and he tells her, he's like moving his hand toward her like, go, go, go. And they all go toward the kitchen. And he's standing there, and he's like, he looks at who is obviously his sister, and she's like, what did you see? And he's like, the little girl's eyes are all black. And she's like, so is the little boy. And they had closed the curtain on the little boy, and it was in the backyard. And at this point, Leila's just in tears. She's like, I can't even see straight. I can't think. My eyes are just, and she's like, I'm frantic. This boy, the teenage boy, tells her, he's like, she opened her mouth, and it's just full of like jaggedy looking teeth. And he's just like, what are these vampires? What's going on here? So they go to try to use the phone, and his mother's, on this cordless phone, and she's trying to call the police. This is not cell phone. Not everybody had cell phones at that time. It was 2001. Trying to call the police, and they can't get through. Like there's nobody, answering, picking up, whatever. And she's like, it just keeps going to like it starts to, like it's going to ring and then doesn't do anything. She calls 911 over and over again. Nothing happens. And so eventually they just kind of standing there. She goes, the TV's going, the TV goes off, and then the lights go off one by one. Boom, 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 boom. She's like, and then she's like, I feel terrible because now I feel like I've endangered this family. And she's like, but this man, he was determined. He just said, you know what? To hell with this. And he went to the front door, and he opened the door, and he had his bat in his hand, and he was just like, get the F out of here. And he opens the door, and there's nothing there. No one. And he steps out, and he looks, and then he goes and closes the door, and him and his son go, and he's not a small kid, They go to the back door, and they go out, and there's nothing there. So they were gone. She's like, and so I waited a little bit. The electricity came back on. She's like, I call my husband. At this point, it's already like 7:00. He's at home. I tell him where I'm at, and he drives down there to pick me up, and we all tell him this crazy story. My husband is in shock. He doesn't know what to believe, but she's like, the good thing was that I had witnesses that were able to corroborate when I'm telling my husband this. And he's just like, I don't know what that could be. I don't know what that is. I don't know what to think of this. But her husband, fortunately for her, had a weird paranormal experience when he was young that made him a believer. And it involved a UFO. But that's the story. And she's like, and I went home. She goes, but it wasn't the end of it. because prior to that, barely anything had ever happened to me that was weird or abnormal. And then after that incident, she's like, it was like a slew of things, went on. And we can talk about that one day. And I'll also get into my security guard, the friend that I used to work with, who's now deceased, but his brother, recapped the story for me. He had told me that story before. He told me and Scorpion one night. We both worked with him at this plant. But that's the black-eyed kid phenomena right there. Like, what is it? I mean, and why are there so many people who've had encounters with these things and not one person has any good explanation of what these things are? I've heard theory after theory, but what are they? What could they be? Where are they from? And what do they want?
I wish that I had a better explanation besides saying that they're demonic entities. I mean, I don't really know necessarily that that's what they are. They're certainly evil.
And what kind?
But what kind of unclean spirits are these things? And are they even from this planet?
Even from this dimension?
Yeah.
I mean, demonic just feels like an umbrella term at this point, just because it's like, all right, it's demonic, but like you said, what type? 'Cause there's no one size fits all when it comes to these things. And for me, what I find really unsettling about the whole black-eyed kid phenomena is that, they're taking the shape of children, or I would assume that could be what they're doing, but because when you see a child, or especially when with the stories where they're asking for help, like with children as, adults, you automatically think, oh my gosh, a child, your instinct is to help. And it's like they exploit that to do whatever it is they're trying to do to people.
Yeah, I kind of am curious if it is trying to take the shape of something. Kids kind of give me like an uncanny valley kind of thing where they're supposed to be kind of innocent. They're supposed to be kind of, you're not supposed to be afraid of them. But when they start acting in a weird way, I think it generates more fear, even though realistically, like,
because it adds another level of weirdness to it.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, you definitely shouldn't be acting like that. And so I wonder if that's what they feed on, is the fear. Because we all know demons and a lot of entities, it's not really a substance that's in the physical. It's more of an energy that they try taking from you. So I'm curious if that's exactly what these things are doing. And just by acting the way they act, they're trying to generate the same kind of reaction that other cryptids or, other entities will do. Yeah.
Kind of reminds me, we covered that story from the lady in Hartford, Connecticut. She inherited her aunt's Victorian house, and her aunt was evil. They found books of magic and stuff. But the main culprit in that particular encounter or encounters was this little boy.
Oh, yeah,
he was like a little boy, and he was, but his eyes were whited out.
Yeah,
they weren't black, but he was obviously not a little boy. It was something evil that liked to take the shape of or form of a little boy. Very malevolent, very evil entity. You wonder what kind of entity that could be, and there's a lot of different suspects.
One idea that just popped into my head, which is really disturbing if you really think about it, is that these things, evil cannot create, right? It can only imitate, pervert, mimic, twist. So if they take the form of children, where are they getting the exact forms of these children?
Yeah, and we were talking the other night about how hundreds of thousands of children go missing.
Yep, exactly.
And who knows because what if these are missing children that could be, I've thought about this, they could be a vessel, or they could be cloned.
Or what if
they're just mimicking these children?
Very disturbing and dark rituals which allow them to sacrifice and then afterwards take the form of these children.
Or they use them as a vessel, like I said.
Yeah.
To fill up with a Nephilim demonic entity of some kind. These things, too, though, I've wondered about them maybe being hybrids or being a part of the alien abduction phenomena. That was something that we should have explored further, but because there is a connection there. And there's a lot more that happened to Leila. This is just the to me, even though she'd had a couple things happen when she was younger, I don't think it was connected to this. This is, to me, was the opening salvo of a spiritual and physical paranormal war that went on with her for years and is still going on. And it's sad, but what do you do? I know that of like what you were saying, Tony, has a lot of like that resonates with me because you see like this scary entity or being or whatever, and it's like an adult looking thing. It's like, okay, that there's something to be afraid of, right?
Just makes more sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it makes more
your mind
sense.
can comprehend it
You
better.
can comprehend it, but a child, you're just like, oh, it's a child.
Right. You let your guard down.
Mm-hmm. Then it becomes something, wretched and evil. And there was a building that I used to work at, and I'm trying to remember the name of that lady. I can't remember her name, dude. It's been bugging me. And I've been thinking about it since I heard this story, and I just can't remember her name, but she used to work with me at another company that I did security at. And she didn't say they were black-eyed children, but she said that building was haunted by two little children. And they were really mischievous at first, but then they became downright evil and nasty. And then I can't remember her name though. But then there was another, when I was doing patrol for this other company, I remember there was another guard there that worked for us. And he said something very similar. He saw like a child in the bathroom. And I remember his name, but I don't know way to get a hold of him. But I just wish I could remember all of what she had told me. Because I remember one night she was talking to me and telling me a bunch of stuff, and I was like so tired and I was falling asleep, and she was just like telling me all this weird stuff, and I couldn't remember, all of what she was telling me. But it is scary. It is creepy in a different way. It's like, and I remember they tried to assign me to that building, and after 2 people had told me that they had encounters with something like that, I was like, man, at least I know that there's something there, and so I was like, I'm not going to work. I don't want to work there, so I ended up going to another building, which also had some weird stuff happening, and that was the building where me and Scorpion saw what we thought was the shadow of a woman, like moving around in there, and it was very creepy going in there. But I remember thinking when I was in that building, at least I'm not at that building where the little creepy ghost children are. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. I was actually more at peace with this, shadow woman than I would have been with some ghost kids. You know what I mean? So yeah, there's something about it. I don't know what it is. I mean, it's like I guess if I had to put my finger on it 100%, I would say that this thing's taking the form of those, so you will let your guard down. Like, it's a trap.
Yeah.
Like that's what makes it so unnerving, is that, you're being messed with. That's what I think. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's extra repulsive to me because they take the form of the innocent and use it for evil. A natural human response to that would be revolting to you. Because if you see like a shadow, you expect that to be an evil
Right.
thing. But you see a little kid, it adds an extra layer of like
insidiousness.
Yeah.
Well, that, and the thing is, the way I would see it is people who have these experiences, it may make them weary around children that they see who are just children and may be in danger, because like you're always going to think in the back of your head, oh my God, like what if this isn't a child? And
well, that's what I thought all the time about Anthony when he was growing up. Every time I'd look at him, I was like, I want to punt this kid across the room, and I don't know why.
I can understand that, because like even right now, just hearing these stories, not having an encounter, I still practice beating up children just to prepare.
yeah,
Just in case.
Gotta be
but
on
the problem
guard.
with your strategy though is every time you go to these McDojos and these children, they always beat you up.
Well, you have to learn to take the hit first. so that you can.
You got to learn how to take a punch before you can throw it, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Maybe one day you'll be able to get through the
One day.
one of these days, the blue belt jiu-jitsu class. Maybe
I learned from Mike Tyson.
I'm going to eat your children. Instead, he runs in and they try to eat him. I was going to eat them, but then they try to eat me.
Everybody's tough until they take a punch to the face.
Yeah,
I'm taking those punches to the face first.
You're getting started. You're getting done. I applaud you for at least trying.
You got to start somewhere.
Yeah, start somewhere. Yeah, most 10-year-olds are stronger than you. That is true.
I haven't hit 10-year-olds yet. I'm still an 8 and 9.
Well, anyways, but weird stuff, right? And even Tony's self-defense practices here. He's like Kramer from was it Seinfeld when he was fighting the children? They beat him up in the alley. Well, folks, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for being, what makes PRT something special, and that's you, the listener. We thank you for joining us for this special edition Paranormal Roundtable. Good night.